At my son's rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws laughed. At least your side of the family knows their place. I quietly made a call, and minutes later, they were all escorted out. Chapter 1: The Reserved Table. I sat at the far end of the long dinner table, surrounded by crystal glasses and conversations I was no part of. The room hummed with laughter, too loud, too polished, the kind that echoed money and legacy, not warmth. This wasn't my world, not really, but my son James was getting married into it. We were at the Oakmoor Country Club, where the chandeliers had names and the bread had more credentials than most people I grew up with. James had met Victoria 2 years ago at law school, and her parents, the Wellingtons, had money old enough to have its own lineage. Her father wore cufflinks that cost more than my truck, and her mother's perfume smelled like judgment masked in roses. I was proud of James. He'd worked hard, earned every inch of where he stood. But as I looked around, it was clear we were merely tolerated here, not welcome. My flannel shirt was replaced with a cheap rented suit. I'd spent days practicing how to hold a wine glass just right, trying not to look like a fool. Even then, I could still feel the eyes, measured glances, tight smiles, like they were checking if I'd chew with my mouth open or start talking about football and engines. Dinner began. Small portions, big plates, conversations about yacht shares, ski seasons, and summer homes in Aspen. I didn't belong. I caught James's eye from across the table. He smiled nervously. He knew I was struggling. He always knew. Then came the toast. Victoria's father stood, tapping his fork against his wine glass with the casual authority of a man used to being heard. "To our daughter," he said, "and to the exciting life she's about to build, with the man she chose, and the family that raised him." There was a pause, a smile, then a snicker from his wife. "At least his side knows their place," she whispered just loud enough for the table to hear. Quiet, respectful, out of the way. The laughter that followed stung. I saw James freeze. He looked at me, panicked, embarrassed, helpless. I didn't say a word. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and made a silent call. The tone of the evening was about to change. Chapter 2: The Call That Echoed. I stepped out onto the balcony while their laughter still echoed behind me, tightening my grip on the phone. The country club's manicured golf course stretched out beneath the moonlight like a quiet insult. I could still hear Victoria's mother's voice in my head. At least his side knows their place. I tapped the screen and waited. 1 ring, 2. Then a deep voice answered. "Mr. Howard, we're ready whenever you are." I kept my voice calm. "Proceed. Discreetly, please. I'll stall for 5 minutes." I hung up. Inside, I paused at the bar and asked for a whiskey. Neat. Something sharp to cut through the bitterness in my mouth. I didn't care what vintage it was. I just needed to feel something other than humiliation. As I returned to the table, James looked at me, concern etched across his face. I gave him the smallest nod. "It's okay," I mouthed. "Finish your dessert." Victoria's father was mid-story now, something about his wine collection being more refined than most people's palates. Her mother leaned over to a woman in pearls and whispered, "This is the only wedding I've been to where the father of the groom looks like he parked the cars." Another round of polite chuckles. And then it started. 2 sharply dressed men in black suits entered the room, speaking quietly to the event coordinator. Her eyes widened. She nodded and pointed toward our table. The men approached, flashing credentials to the staff. A hush began to ripple through the guests. Victoria's father stiffened. "Excuse me," he said, standing halfway. The taller man spoke politely but firmly. "Are you Charles Wellington?" "Yes." "I'm going to need to ask you and your wife to step outside for a moment. It's about your charitable foundation." Charles frowned. "What about it?" "Sir, outside. Now." His wife scoffed. "We're in the middle of dinner." "I'm afraid it's urgent, ma'am." As they were led away, a murmur swept through the room like wildfire. Victoria looked at James. "What is going on?" James looked at me. I just sipped my whiskey and said softly, "Reckoning." You could hear a pin drop as a third man entered, a gray-haired gentleman with a clipboard and quiet authority. He walked straight to the podium at the front of the room, cleared his throat, and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the interruption. We've just been informed that the Wellington Family Foundation's use of this venue was misrepresented on multiple legal documents. Effective immediately, their membership has been suspended pending investigation." Gasps. The man glanced directly at me, nodded once, and stepped down. People turned, shocked. I took one slow breath. The laughter was gone now, and the silence, it belonged to me. Chapter 3. The invitation they weren't expecting. By the time Charles and his wife re-entered the hall, the entire room had shifted. Eyes no longer sparkled with smug delight. They darted nervously, uncertain where to look, unsure what to believe. Charles's face was a tight knot of confusion and panic. Victoria, pale and flushed, rushed toward her father. "Dad, what's happening?" He muttered, "They're saying the foundation's funds are under audit, that I forged something in the club's name. Ridiculous." The whispers turned into currents. Fraud, money laundering, suspended membership. Didn't he just donate a new wine cellar to the club? I stood slowly, tucked my hands in my jacket, and stepped toward the podium. "I know this wasn't on the schedule," I said, clearing my throat, "but if I may, I'd like to say something." As the father of the groom, all eyes turned to me. Victoria rolled her eyes. Her mother visibly flinched. I smiled calmly. I was told earlier this evening that I was not the kind of man who belongs in this room, that my work clothes, my hands, my background were too humble to sit at this table, that my son would be better off learning success from champagne, not sweat. Victoria's jaw tightened. Her fiancé, my son, looked away. "But what they forgot," I continued, "is that success isn't inherited. It's not passed down with wine cellars or golf club memberships. It's built, quietly, relentlessly, and often alone." Then I turned slightly and nodded to the maitre d' by the door. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a change in venue for the wedding." Victoria gasped. "What?" I handed her a crisp white envelope. "Open it." She fumbled with the flap, pulled out the card, and paled. "What is this?" she snapped. Her mother peered over her shoulder and nearly dropped her glass. The card read, "New venue, the Ridgeview Estate, proudly owned and operated by Patterson Enterprises, founded and built by the groom's father, 1993. I nodded, slow and deliberate. "You see, this club, this dinner, none of it was ever truly yours. You borrowed power to impress people who don't even care about you." I looked at my son. "But this was always yours. I just needed to remind you." Another voice chimed in. It was the same man who had announced the audit. "And for the record, Mr. Patterson is not only a founding member of Ridgeview, but also its majority shareholder." Every head turned. I could almost hear the click in their minds as the truth settled in. Victoria's father sank into his chair. Her mother looked nauseous. And James, my son, slowly stood. He didn't say much, just walked over to me, hugged me, and whispered, "Thank you for not walking away when I did." The toast never happened that night, but the silence that followed, that was louder than any applause. Chapter 4. The name on the gate. The next morning, Ridgeview Estate was bathed in soft, golden light. Fresh-cut white roses lined the main entrance, and a string quartet rehearsed under the grand archway where a sign now read, "Private Event, the Patterson Family Wedding." As the first guest began to arrive, their expressions shifted from confusion to awe. Some whispered, "This is his place?" Others marveled at the manicured grounds, the private vineyard in the distance, and the custom stonework on the gate's pillars. But the centerpiece was hard to miss, a 10-foot wrought iron gate with one name welded into it in elegant script, Patterson. Guests passed through slowly, reverently. Some were from Victoria's side, the very same people who had smirked at me the night before. Today, their tone had changed. No arrogance, just awkward smiles and shallow compliments. The wedding ceremony began on the estate's west lawn. The same minister officiated, though he looked far more respectful this time. James stood proudly at the altar, and when I walked my future daughter-in-law down the aisle, not Victoria, but Lena, the entire room gasped again. Yes, Lena. My son had ended things that same night after seeing who truly stood by him. Turns out, love isn't measured in inheritance or luxury dinners, but in who holds your hand when no one's clapping. Victoria never showed up to the new wedding, neither did Charles. But just as the ceremony ended, a black SUV pulled up by the gates. Charles stepped out, glared at the name on the arch, then turned, only to find a photographer capturing the moment. The irony was delicious. After the couple said their vows, I gave my own gift, a key, not just symbolic, a real key. This, I told James, isn't just a home. It's your name on the gate, your legacy. Make it better than I ever could. Tears welled in his eyes, not from the property, but from the journey it took to get there, through shame, doubt, and finally clarity. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn, I sat quietly at a corner table, watching my son dance with his new wife, the people who once judged me now lining up to shake my hand. Not one word of revenge passed my lips. I didn't need to say anything. The gate said it all. Epilogue: the man they tried to erase. A few months after the wedding, I received a letter. It wasn't from James or Lena. It wasn't from the guests who once judged me and now sent me polite invitations to their charity galas. It was from Victoria, just a folded piece of stationery, no perfume, no flourish, just a single line in her sharp, looping handwriting. You didn't have to humiliate us. I read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one where I keep old receipts, expired warranties, and things that used to matter. I never replied. Because here's the truth, I never humiliated anyone. I simply stopped apologizing for who I was, for what I built, for what I endured so my son could grow up with a man who didn't beg for validation, but quietly proved he was enough. James and Lena now visit often. They talk about expanding the vineyard, maybe opening a little cafe on the property. I let them dream out loud. Sometimes I just walk the edge of the estate near the front gate where the name still gleams in steel and shadow. Patterson. They tried to bury that name, replace it, mock it. But they forgot one thing. You can't erase a man who refuses to disappear. And you can't shame a father who never stopped showing up. Was this revenge perfectly justified? Or should the storm have raged harder? Drop your verdict below. I read every single one. Hit like if you crave justice, and share this story with someone who needs its fire. Subscribe to Lauren's Story, sire, because here, betrayals don't sleep. They hunt their owners. Every shadow hides a reckoning. Every mask breaks, and every betrayal is answered. Stay sharp, stay unbroken, stay tuned.